move into our next subcommittee panel, which is again the Health Subcommittee. Our next presentation, this policy brief will focus on the impacts and risks associated with engineered carbon capture and storage projects, with the focus on currently proposed projects in the San Joaquin Valley. This will be followed up by a discussion of just climate solutions, including direct emissions reduction strategies and carbon sequestration on natural and working lands. So it's my pleasure to bring to the stage next the Environmental Justice Subcommittee for the IHEAL platform. And I'll turn it over now to Nayameen Martinez of the Central California Environmental Justice Network. Welcome, Nayameen.
For me to be here joining this wonderful team of community organizations that are part of the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund. On behalf of the Environmental Justice Subcommittee of the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund, I want to welcome you to this policy briefing. It is a pleasure for us to present to you an opportunity to learn and engage in a discussion about what are the community visions of climate justice in the San Joaquin Valley. And to set up us in the right path, it is my pleasure to introduce you Sarah Sharp. She will be giving us some opening remarks. Sarah is representing the Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9, but more important, Sarah is a long-time friend and EJ advocate. So with that, please, Sarah.
Naomi, it looks like Sarah's having a little bit of internet issues on her end of it, so we're going to be working with her to get those up. If we want to go ahead and maybe move into the program, we can then bring Sarah up on when we get her back up on screen.
Wonderful. Our apologies. Technology could be your best friend or your worst enemy. So
absolutely.
There's Sarah. Just in time. She was waiting. She wanted to do a splash presentation.
Yes. Welcome, Sarah.
Sorry, I apologize. I don't know what's going on with my internet. I'm actually using a hotspot, so can you still hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Sarah.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay,
Sarah, if you can hear me and you could mute your camera and just share your audio, that might be helpful. Try to speak now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Well, that's no fun, but good. Thanks, Nayameen. I don't know if you introduced me. I guess you did. First of all, I want to send greetings from our regional administrator for EPA, Martha Guzman. I am now her chief of staff. As of, I think I'm a week and a half into the job. So thank you for inviting me. And as you all probably know, she has a long-standing commitment to environmental justice in disadvantaged communities, which makes it the reason that I am working with her. I'm very excited to be working with her. And this, the topic that you're going to be discussing today of climate, carbon capture and storage is actually the first thing she brought me in on when I started my new position. So I know it's a very important issue to her, and she's very looking forward to hearing, I will be looking forward to hearing what this panel discusses. So at EPA Region 9, we currently have 5 permits applications that are submitted and are under review, and they are all in the San Joaquin Valley. And I know that we've been working with a lot of the EJ community representatives here to discuss the process. But just for those who haven't been in those conversations, our primary role at the EPA is through the underground injection control regulations. And this is a Class 6 type of project. So our role is to protect public health and drinking water resources in that area. We obviously have to check the applications and go through a public process to demonstrate that they meet all of our requirements, to make sure they will not leak and they will not create more pollution, et cetera. I can just say that the regional administrator, that Martha, is very committed to a robust public process. and she wants to make sure that we engage the concerned communities with having meetings in the potentially impacted communities. She's committed to seriously looking at all the community concerns that are raised. And we will be looking specifically at the monitoring requirements. That's one area that she wanted me to highlight. And it needs to be, we need to make sure that they are structured for long-term oversight, not just a permitted and done process. So she's committed to that. And we want to make sure that any monitoring regime that's required inspires community confidence. And so I don't want to speak too long, but I just want to say we will also engage our counterparts at the local air districts in their review of the air pollution component of these permits. In this case, for the permits that we're reviewing right now, it would be the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. We are also collaborating a lot with EPA Region 6, which is also confronting this issue and community concerns. That is the area that includes Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma. And we are also collaborating with other state and federal agencies that have a role in this issue, such as the Air Resources Board, California Air Resources Board, and the Department of Energy. And we are trying to engage more academics, and obviously the environmental justice community and advocates to plan some convenings that will be coming up later throughout the summer to really learn more about community concerns, as well as get more feedback on promising mitigation ideas and concepts. So please keep an eye out for invitations to those conversations. As I said, I will be here taking notes and sharing it with the regional administrator. We're always happy to hear the community perspective. And as always, if there's any other issue that we can be helpful with at US EPA Region 9, we always have an open door. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me, or I can get you in touch with the administrator with questions or concerns. Thank you. And I'm sorry that I couldn't have my camera on. I'll try it again. Gracias.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah. Gracias. It was a pleasure to have you here, and send our regards to Administrator Marta. And as she was saying, there's a lot to learn. There's going to be more discussions throughout the summer, but we don't have to wait until the summer. Let's start this learning process about what CCUS are and how these potential projects will be impacting the Central Valley. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first panelist, Genevieve Amsalon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is there a PowerPoint showing? Wonderful. Hello, everyone. My name is Genevieve Amsalem, and I am the Research and Policy Director for the Central California Environmental Justice Network. And I'm here to give a quick primer on industrial carbon capture and sequestration technologies, or CCS. Next slide, please. So to start, when we talk about carbon capture, I want you to think about the San Joaquin Valley and the Los Angeles air basins. So the San Joaquin Valley is the most polluted air basin in the nation for fine particle pollution, or PM 2.5. PM 2.5 is the most deadly air pollutant there is. It can bypass our normal defenses, get deep into the lungs, and actually enter the bloodstream. And this can lead to inflammation in the heart and in the brain. Multiple studies have found that as ambient PM 2.5 levels increase, so do hospitalizations for childhood asthma attacks and heart attacks for adults. In Kern County, 1 out of 37 people die of a chronic respiratory disease. This is a rate 12 times higher than the rest of the state. I'll say that again. People in Kern County die of a chronic respiratory disease at a rate 12 times higher than the rest of the state. So for ozone, we are the second most polluted air basin in the nation. What's terrifying about ozone is that if you work outside, for instance, as a farm worker, you cannot protect yourself. Masks do not protect against gases. And so what are the impacts of ozone? For children, ozone stunts lung development, can lead to the development and exacerbation of asthma. And adults, same is true for development and exacerbation of multiple diseases. And I hope we all know that asthma can kill. We have multiple partners in the EJ movement that have joined the movement solely because they lost a loved one to an asthma attack. Now, on the right, there's a map from Stanford's study on carbon capture potential in California. The green identifies basins with carbon sequestration potential. As you can see, it aligns with the San Joaquin Valley and the Los Angeles air basins. So when we talk about carbon capture, I want you to think about the San Joaquin Valley. Right now, there are currently 17 CCS projects proposed for California, 5 of which have actually submitted permit applications to the US EPA. And of these 17, 75% are proposed for the Valley. Next slide, please. So quickly talk about different types of carbon capture. The one on the left is direct air capture, which takes carbon directly out of the atmosphere. There are currently 19 direct air capture plants operating worldwide, mainly very small ones, and together they capture about 0.01 metric tons of carbon a year. To put that in perspective, some people at CARB want to capture upwards of 80 or 100 metric tons. Then there's natural carbon sequestration, which we'll get into more later. And lastly, there's carbon capture and storage projects. These are projects that capture carbon from emission streams, not ambient air, and it pumps it underground. They're inherently parasitic to polluting facilities because you need the pollution to start with, and they're almost always located in environmental justice communities. So of the 17 proposed projects, they're all this type, CCS, industrial CCS. Next slide, please. As a quick aside, some like to think using carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery is CCS, but I think this is debatable. CO2 has proven successful in rejuvenating oil production. In fact, according to the Senate Natural Resources and Water Committee analysis of SB 1314, quote, the widespread use of carbon dioxide for enhanced oil recovery could result in an additional 400,000 barrels of oil produced daily in the nation by 2035. Most commonly, oil and gas companies actually have extracted CO2 from natural deposits. So historically in the US, there's very little actual carbon capture from emission streams and very little actual sequestration. That same analysis goes on to state that, quote, CO2 for oil production is not necessarily the permanent sequestration of carbon dioxide, as CO2 returns to the surface with the produced oil, unquote. So I don't like to call this process CCS, but many do. There's lots of other projects proposed to put CCS technologies on bioenergy facilities, refineries, and with the goal to capture and sequester that carbon. So let's talk about those. Next slide, please. Thank you. So of the true CCS projects, what are the local air quality impacts? The European Environmental Agency found that CCS on natural gas power plants increases the facility's emissions of criteria air pollutants by 11 to 22%. On coal gasification units, emissions increase by up to 25%. This is called the energy penalty, because this equipment requires a lot of energy to run. So CCS inherently increases air pollution in environmental justice communities. Now I'll make just 2 more points before passing it along. Next slide, please. So in addition to air quality impacts, there are other risks. Research indicates that if CO2 stored underground were to leak in even small amounts, it would cause metals such as uranium, barium, manganese, cobalt, and nickel to be released into shallow groundwater aquifers at concentrations known to pose a health risk. So CCS risks our community's drinking water as well. And if CO2 were to escape into the atmosphere, it would be much more dangerous than a methane leak. Abandoned oil wells right now are leaking left and right in Kern County. CO2 could actually escape through an abandoned oil well, as seen in this graphic. And if it were to leak, CO2 is heavier than air, so it would accumulate at ground level, and CO2 displaces oxygen. 2 years ago in Mississippi, a CO2 pipeline ruptured and the leak led to the hospitalization of 49 people, many of whom suffered permanent lifelong lung damage. What's somehow even scarier is as residents tried to flee, their cars would not start because there was not enough oxygen in the air to spark the engines. CCS not only increases air pollution and poses risks to our drinking water, it risks the very lives of our community members. Last slide, please. Lastly, these are the proposed projects for California. 75% of them are proposed for the San Joaquin Valley, and 75% of those are proposed by or partnered with an oil and gas company. One is even for enhanced oil recovery. Now, I'll pass it on to Lupe and Rocio, amazing community leaders in our region, who will dive into some of the proposed projects for the Valley. Lupe, I believe you're up first. Thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. My name is Lupe Martinez. I live in Delano, and I am part of a committee called the Delano Guardians. We live here in Delano with an old 90s biomass operation that was here, and then it's been idle since 2015. Then some companies bought the Covanta in Delano biomass power plant, which they are talking about starting it back up, which in reality is going to pose a great danger to our community on this capture and storage. Their plan is to burn trees, agricultural waste, and so on for electricity, and then take the captured carbon dioxide and store it underground near our homes and our schools, which will worsen the public's health, exacerbate the climate crisis, and endanger, of course, public safety. When it first started, this biomass back in the 90s, they did tell us, but I guess we as a community weren't too much aware of what they were talking about, but they did tell us that there would be higher asthmas, lung problems, respiratory issues, and so on. However, when it idled in 2015, we never really found out what had happened, of how high those asthma rates were, and so on. So the biomass plants are going to emit a large amount of toxics into our air, which is already in trouble. We have a lot of issues with the contamination, and certainly we are going to face other issues. Within the valley, we already have a lot of trouble with our water being contaminated. So by this carbon sequestration, we really don't know what the issues are going to really impact us with. So bringing these facilities back, as I mentioned, it's just going to hurt the community even further than where we're at this point. We don't know what it really means by injecting this. We do know that there's a lot of earthquakes in California, and certainly there's other issues that we're facing at this point. So when we talk about clean energy solutions, they're really not real solutions. More than likely, it's false solutions to our climate crisis. And so what we need to start doing, and this is, in my opinion, is that we got to start doing something else. We need to figure out where we have policymakers who can stand up, step up, and do the changes in policy that are going to really protect our communities. We're always relying on them. They tell us there's not going to be any trouble. And in the end, our EJ communities are the ones who always suffer. We end up paying for it, even though as taxpayers, we all pay for whatever their experiments are. So again, I would say that we need to make sure that our regulators take charge, and we need to make sure that the cost is not passed on to the tax rate payers. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello, my name is Rocio Madrigal. I'm with Central California Environmental Justice Network. I am going to talk to you today about the Mendota Carbon Negative Energy Project. You might ask yourself, where is Mendota? How big of a town it is? So, you're muted. I'm muted. Oh my gosh. How am I muted?
We can hear you. You're doing just fine.
Sorry about that. Okay, so Mendota is a very small community about 50 miles west of the city of Fresno, very rural. The population is about 96% Latino. Many do not speak English, and they live in extreme poverty. Almost 40% of these people live in poverty. And also, the high school graduate rate is only 35.5%. I lived there for 20 years. Now, next slide. Now, Chevron and Clean Energy Systems, a group of companies, have just purchased the idled Covanta Mendota biomass power plant. It was the greatest polluter in 3 counties. They submitted this application to open the biomass, but also to add the carbon capture and storage that we call CCS. This is an unproven system. Next. Oh. Now, Mendota's biomass and CCS project is more of the same environmental racism. Chevron and Clean Energy Systems followed the recipe that targets towns like Mendota for their CCS project. Let me explain. There was a Cyril report in 1984, so almost 40 years ago, that gave a recipe and recommendations of where hazardous waste facilities should be placed. They should be placed in small rural communities, residents with low education, and certainly with low income. These 3 are describing what I just described to you, the city of Mendota. Now, the communities whose residents are engaged in the resource extractive industries. You might ask, well, why isn't this biomass and CCS project, why is it not good for Mendota? Well, when it was active, the biomass was the largest stationary source of PM 2.5. We all know that that is not good for anybody and anybody's health. It was the largest source of pollution in Kings, Fresno, and Madera counties combined. This was a large plant. Now, the proposed biomass and CCS plants would require a lot more energy to power the carbon capture and storage. This means that if the facility is restarted, it's going to create more emissions and climate pollutants and hazardous air pollutants. Again, why is it not good? The companies plan to store the captured carbon underneath the biomass plant in Mendota, which is very, very close to schools. It's literally the backyard of a mobile home park and very close to 2 schools. This underground storage poses a high risk of leakage, drinking water contamination, and potential triggers to earthquakes. All of these are not good. Storing this captured carbon in high concentration is very dangerous. It can cause suffocation and death, and as Genevieve explained, in an example where there was an accident, permanent, long-term disabled lives. Now, you might ask, well, you said Mendota is 50 miles out.
That's how far they would have to drive from Mendota to the nearest hospital. There is no hospital in Mendota. And there is only one ambulance. So it is a catastrophe waiting to happen, this type of accident in this community. Now, we knocked on doors. We do work in Mendota, and we knocked on doors and asked if people knew about the proposed project. These are people that live half a mile from this biomass. They were not aware and they did not want it. So they signed a petition asking the EPA to meet with them and to hear their voices that they did not want this hazardous biomass CCS project to happen. So we invited General Administrator Marta Guzman and our team, and we met with these families in a very small mobile home. And the way I describe it is a mischief mobile home. They live in not only places that are not mobile homes, they are RVs, campers, and whole families live in these. They use swamp coolers, so if there is PM 2.5, they bring it all inside to them, to their children. And after sending this letter and meeting with Marta, the applicant withdrew this permit on April 13th. This is a win. This is what happens when the community works and we find the right people to listen. This is a victory for now, but we must continue the work. And now I will give this floor to Pedro Hernandez. He is the Deputy Director of the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. Thank you.
Hey everyone, I assume you can hear me. And thank you, Rocio and Lupe, and and everyone else for having us today. And for me, just personally, I guess I always have to start this off by saying it's such an honor to share these types of spaces with so many great environmental justice advocates that really are responsible directly for building the movement that we're speaking on today. So for my time, and I'm actually just putting my stopwatch, I'll be talking about potential solutions to these issues. But before I even get there, let me introduce myself. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the Deputy Director for the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. We are a coalition of about 70 different organizations here in the San Joaquin Valley, working on air issues for about 20 years now. So this presentation and this, what I'll be talking about is informed by those decades of policy work, but also with real life experience here in the Valley as an effective community member myself. And of course, I would be remiss to not say that CCUS is a false solution. Maybe for a little context, this is an ongoing conversation right now in the legislature where representatives are discussing essentially the fate of the San Joaquin Valley and whether or not these false solutions will be moving forward. And so I think it's really important to ground these conversations in the fact that these projects are being supported by the polluting industry. They are lobbying the governor, they are lobbying our senators and assembly members to make sure that this climate solution, so they're going to use public climate money to help generate more pollution. And that's not a solution with integrity. And it's also, the way they're framing it is that there's energy shortages as well. So they're looking for ways to keep generating more electricity for the rest of the state by extending the lives of these polluting industries. And so it's really important, I think, to also ground this conversation in the fact that they're viewing the Central Valley as a sacrifice zone where there are certain levels of pollution that are acceptable for the greater good. And of course, as local Valley-based environmental justice advocates, we are pushing back against that because we don't believe that any level of pollution is acceptable for residents who are forced to live in these communities in the first place. So there's been a lot of talk around what these are used for, but I want to suggest a couple of alternatives to not only clean up the air in the San Joaquin Valley, because we are currently still in a clean air emergency, but also it's important to think about what are the alternatives to move forward. So first of all, I would suggest that it's important to shut down these polluting power plants, to shut down these incinerators, to no longer extend their lives, because inherently they were located in these communities that are majority people of color, because there was no one to push back against them. There was, and of course, they don't want to put these on the rich communities. I mean, just to say it super directly, there's no really other way to explain it. So ultimately, we need to shut down these polluting plants, because even if we put fancy, expensive technology to capture the carbon, there's nothing being done to address the pollution from the diesel trucks that are going to be pulling in these trees and this biomass that will be burned. There's nothing to address or mitigate the other associated air pollution. And ultimately, if it is generating more oil, it's going to be creating actually more carbon emissions. So at the end of the day, we need to shut down these polluting power plants. This is also tied to a transition to renewable energy. And it's important because we know that the technology exists. We know that it's possible. We also know that there's a lot of renewable energy projects that are being located and developed here in the Valley that don't necessarily serve Central Valley communities either. So there are large solar farms that generate electricity for other parts of the state. So it's going to be really important that the San Joaquin Valley is going to be benefiting equitably from this transition to clean energy. Because again, we know that we can't be solving one problem by generating pollution, because we know that pollution is going to stay in the valley. So we need solutions with integrity. Another just broad recommendation is to consider public health in the development of projects and development of legislation and other rules as well. Because at the end of the day, public health is always sacrificed at the expense of profits and at the expense of political favors. And as cliche or generic as the statement is, we would not be in our clean air emergency if public health was prioritized first. And so at the end of the day, legislators at every level, and this is from the Fresno Board of Supervisors to all the way up to the state governor and the EPA, we need to prioritize public health, because when we're not centering that discussion first, then people's lives are sacrificed. And again, this is people's children, grandparents, friends, families. So this and we know that there's not one. My theory is everyone knows somebody with asthma in the San Joaquin Valley. And so even if there is progress, the fact that we still know someone with asthma is the indicator that we know that the progress has not been far enough. And then ultimately, I think another just broad solution is that we need to hold the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District accountable. So far, that agency has been addressed one time in this presentation, and we work a lot with them. But more broadly, that agency has representatives from every Valley county. And that agency is also what we call at CVAC a captured agency, where they are heavily influenced by the industries they are supposed to regulate. So again, for the oil industry, there's tons of loopholes that they're passing. And they are one of the main agencies that will help address and their duties are to address and consider air quality protections. And so we need to hold that agency and other local agencies accountable, because again, there can be plenty of laws and regulations, but if they're not enforced, if they're not adequately funded, and if there's tons of loopholes in the programs, then none of the pretty language that we're going to be advocating for will be worth it. And then finally, which can be a transition to the next speakers, is that we need to support ecologically and nature-based ways to sequester carbon. Because so far we've been talking about technology, but we know that nature is a solution, and that when we protect nature and we enhance nature, there's tons of other co-benefits for habitat, for people, for water that we all need as well too. So it's one of the best win-win solutions out there. So without much further ado, I'll stop my time here and pass it over to the next speaker. So thank you all.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Nayamin, for inviting me to be part of this today. I'm very honored. I'm Ellie Cohen, CEO of the Climate Center, a climate and energy policy nonprofit focused on accelerated equitable climate action in California. As goes California, goes the world. Can I have my slides, please? Thank you. Next slide, please. So I wanted to start off to put this in the global context that our current global climate goals that were established 3 years ago that most countries and states are following, basically, as bold as they are, we need to do more, but they're really to cut emissions in half by 2030 and remove upwards of 1,000 gigatons or 1 trillion tons of past climate pollution we've already dumped into the atmosphere to get to net zero emission or carbon neutrality by 2050 across the world. And as bold as they are, our fossil fuel economy is already, as we've heard again and again today, and we all know from real experience, our lived experiences, it's already impacting our communities and climate change is rapidly worsening. We have to do a lot more sooner. But the key is we have to cut emissions and we have to draw down from the atmosphere past emissions as well to get to a safe climate. Next slide, please. In the Western US, because of global warming, that we are in a severe mega drought, a multi-decadal drought. It's the worst in 1,200 years. The latest science is showing that it is not expected to get better until at least 2030 or later. And it really does threaten a Dust Bowl economy and for our agricultural economy and economy-wide by as early as 2027. So that the crops we're growing today, if we don't do something about our water issues, from clean water to helping grow our crops, we may not be able to grow most of the crops that we are growing today within a handful of years. Next slide. And of course, as we've talked about today, increasing health impacts, particularly in the San Joaquin Valley communities. Lots of studies showing how fossil fuel air pollution is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally, heat waves being a lead climate-related killer, and in the valley, various respiratory illnesses, including valley fever, with infections surging in California. Next slide. So the nation and the world are looking to California to lead on this, but as we all know, California is not leading and is actually falling behind. We have to accelerate the path to carbon negative and equity positive. Right now, our leaders in California are talking about 2045 for getting to carbon neutrality, which is way too late. We're talking about the health of our communities on the front line here, and 2045 is unacceptable. Next slide. One of the things we've been working on at the Climate Center is looking at how can we draw down past emissions to help us get to a safer climate without CCS, without carbon capture and storage. And we can use nature and we can do it in a way that has multiple benefits for our communities, for our health, for our food production, and for biodiversity. We did a report in January about California's working lands and agricultural lands, and we quantified what is the maximum possible amount of carbon we could sequester per year. And we got to 103 million metric tons if everything was working together. It doesn't include additional sequestration from natural lands, from forests, from montane and coastal wetlands and nearshore habitat. This study was done in partnership with the Carbon Cycle Institute with Tori Estrada and Dr. Jeff Creek, and it's been reviewed by various soil scientists. Next slide. And there are lots of benefits to scaling up soil carbon storage in California's working lands. We estimate that we can get to over 100 million metric tons a year sequestered. That's equal to roughly a quarter of the state's emissions annually. And you get all kinds of benefits from healthy soils and healthy habitats, including better water security and retention in the soil, replenishing of groundwater, air and water quality improvements, wildfire and heat extreme resilience, more crop yield, stability and resilience, better for birds and biodiversity and other wildlife, increasing jobs, and more. Next slide. This slide shows some of the different practices on agricultural lands and urban lands. And as you can see on the left, it lists them out, and it includes compost application so that we can use food waste not to produce more methane and more climate pollution from landfills, but actually have it used to apply in small amounts across soil that will increase carbon sequestration. So on pasture land, on croplands, riparian or streamside habitat restoration, but also the last one is avoiding synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, which pollute the air, pollute the water, and pollute our communities. Next. So we have been working with many partners, and our key partners, the lead sponsors of this bill are the Carbon Cycle Institute, the California Association of Resource Conservation Districts, and Pew Charitable Trust, with over 75 organizations supporting AB 2649, the Natural Carbon Sequestration and Resilience Act of 2022. We went to a number of different members of the legislature, and Assembly member Cristina Garcia, who's in Bell Gardens, Los Angeles, surrounded by 6 freeways, jumped on the opportunity to do this because of urban greening and what it can do to reduce heat stress and reduce pollution for her community. But there's all kinds of other benefits. And this bill would establish the first ever statutory goal for natural carbon removal by 2030 and 2035. We, as I've said, 75 organizations supporting it, with benefits for our climate, for our health, for our water, for food production, for our environment and our economy. It just passed out of the Assembly and is heading to the Senate now. And if you want to support it, you can go to theclimatecenter.org/AB 2649 for more information. Next slide. Just to highlight again, urban greening is huge. It naturally sequesters carbon, reduces extreme heat impacts, reduces air pollution. Next slide. Natural lands and waters are part of this. So from the mountains to the ocean, and it will help reduce fire and increase clean water and clean air. Next slide. And carbon farming. And we're going to hear next from Sarah Aird from the Californians for Pesticide Reform to talk more specifically about how improved practices for organic farming and regenerative farming can help sequester more carbon and have multiple benefits for our community. So I'll pass it on to Sarah. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellie. Really appreciate it. My name is Sarah Aird, and I'm policy strategist with the statewide coalition Californians for Pesticide Reform. And we work directly with communities on the front lines of pesticide exposure in the San Joaquin Valley, as well as in other agricultural regions around the state. It's critical that agriculture and the kind of agriculture, such as organic farming and agroecological farming, that protects the environment and public health is robustly incentivized and supported in all state climate and natural and working lands initiatives in California to the fullest extent possible. This is important not only because it will help California achieve our climate goals more quickly, but it will also significantly improve health outcomes in many of California's agricultural regions, which suffer from amongst the worst air and water quality in the entire nation. As we've heard from other speakers, communities in the San Joaquin Valley already suffer from among the highest rates of asthma and other respiratory diseases, cancer, and neurodevelopmental impacts. And this impact is not felt evenly among Californians, but is an environmental justice and civil rights matter, as farm worker and Latino low-income communities of color are subjected to disproportionate exposure to toxins from a multitude of sources. This includes the largest amount of agricultural chemicals, including synthetic pesticides, used anywhere in the country, approximately 100 million pounds of which are used each and every year in the San Joaquin Valley. In fact, researchers at the California EPA found that pesticide use was the pollution burden that showed the greatest racial, ethnic, and income disparities in the state, disproportionately imposing more of a hazard than multiple air pollutants and other toxic releases. And this pesticide use props up an unsustainable form of industrial monocropping for export that leaves many of the very communities that grow our food actually lacking access to food, with some of the most food insecure counties in the nation being in the San Joaquin Valley, including Tulare and Fresno, where agricultural profits are in the billions of dollars each year. Climate justice requires that our communities that are the most impacted by industrial and other forms of pollution are centered in climate solutions, and that those solutions lessen the pollution burden experienced by those communities. Carbon sequestration technologies, as we have heard, threaten to leave these very same communities as ongoing sacrifice zones, likely bearing the risk of even greater pollution. Instead, to address this disproportionate pollution burden and support improved climate at the same time, the state should be robustly incentivizing pesticide reduction practices, including expansion of organic, agroecological, and regenerative farming. Organic farming bans use of all synthetic fertilizers and more than 900 synthetic pesticides with only a very few exceptions, prohibits genetically modified organisms, and avoids the microplastics that are now being added to synthetic pesticides and fertilizers. In addition to the benefits to water and air quality, public health, and the environment, a multitude of studies comparing hundreds of organic and conventional farms, both here in California and nationally, have now documented how organic farming sequesters significantly more carbon than conventional farming, and at deeper, more stable depths. One California study by UC Davis found that organic systems resulted in 14 times the rate of carbon sequestration as conventional farming. The longest running organic comparison study in the United States documented that after 22 years, soil organic carbon increased by 15 to 28% in organically managed soils compared to 9% in the conventionally managed soils. Additional pesticide reduction strategies can result in vibrant microbe and soil invertebrate populations that have not been decimated by pesticide use, which leads to healthier soils that are better able to fix nitrogen and cycle nutrients throughout the soil and to plants, which means lessening the need for harmful synthetic fertilizers. And in turn, these healthier soils mean healthier plants that are also better able to withstand pests and diseases on their own, as well as significantly greater carbon sequestration. Pesticide reduction will also result in direct reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, such as tropospheric ozone, which is recognized by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change as the third most potent greenhouse gas, as well as reductions in nitrous oxide, a greenhouse gas 300 times more potent than carbon dioxide, whose levels increase 7-fold to 100-fold as a result of certain heavily used fumigants. Pesticide reduction will also lead to better protection of community health as people experience less chronic exposure to pesticides that can cause devastating, lifelong, or life-threatening ailments such as asthma and cancer. The pesticide reductions result in better protection of air quality, water quality, and better protection of biodiversity and ecosystems, including the very pollinators that remain essential for much of our farming to even be possible. It is for these reasons that we're calling for California to catch up to other agricultural economies and become a national leader and adopt similar pesticide reduction targets as those that have already been adopted by the 27 countries that make up the European Union as part of their farm to fork strategy. This would mean setting a goal of 50% reduction of synthetic agricultural pesticide use by 2030, starting with the most toxic pesticides, including carcinogenic fumigants, brain-harming organophosphates, and neonics. It would also mean setting a statewide goal of having 30% of all agricultural acreage being organically farmed by 2030. Currently, the scoping plan sets a 30% target for organic acreage, but not until 2045, which would not act as an incentive as it's not even keeping up with the current market growth of organic production. And finally, not classifying or allowing for pesticides to be incentivized in any way is a climate smart strategy. As earlier speakers described, emerging independent science is showing that industrial carbon capture and sequestration technologies are not living up to their promised carbon sequestration expectations. And those technologies may have significant harmful impacts on environmental justice communities, but they're being included in nearly all climate initiatives. At the same time, pesticide reduction strategies, including organic farming and other holistic types of farming, including agroecological farming and regenerative farming, are not currently being sufficiently supported in climate initiatives, even though we know that reduction of pesticides will benefit the very communities most impacted by climate. This must change. And I will now turn it over to my colleague, Gustavo Aguirre, to wrap up.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I think it's Nayamin normally says, it sometimes feels that our leaders see the climate crisis as the priority issue to solve, while the right of breeding clean air, drinking clean water, they see it as a secondary issue. I urge legislators, agencies to readjust your priorities. As Pedro mentioned, I think we need to find solutions with integrity. And I think several of the speakers mentioned, those options that it can be done, with integrity. I urge you, to see the problems forced upon our communities not as secondary issue, but as the discriminatory false solutions, the true reasons behind the climate crisis. It's not just methane gases from dairies. That's not the only problem, or their industrial scale, on the animal feed pollution, which pollutes, our air and water. It's not just carbon sequestration, from smoke stacks, that's not only the problem. It's also, the dirty fossil fuels, that pollute our air and water. We cannot look at our climate issue in a vacuum. We need to understand the underlying issues. We need to see where climate and justice intersect. You cannot continue to treat our communities as sacrifice zone. An example, I think, is the proposed ideas of carbon sequestration on abandoned oil wells in Kern County, for example. Right now, the last week and this week, Cesar Aguirre with CCJN is been with the CalGEM inspectors here in Kern, looking, one after another abandoned wells in violation. So, and it's just, to remind us that the industry is not known to follow the rules. They don't follow the rules, and bringing carbon sequestration to oil wells is just to keep, in this case, Kern County as the junkyard of pollution. So we can do better than that. It's not just climate and the justice. It's climate justice. We need to put them together. And I will pass it to Pedro, which is going to facilitate the questions and answers.
Hey everyone, I'm back after eating a bowl of cereal. Yeah, so again, thanks everyone for joining so far. I believe I'll be joined by a few more panelists. Please feel free to drop any questions in the chat. And I see actually one question coming up right now. So, as advocates and members of the community, how do you make sure that the most impacted communities are at the table calling for changes, or do you build new tables? So maybe we'll, if anyone wants to take a stab at this, I saw you, Nayamin. Go for it.
Yeah, I can start, but definitely chime in. I think that the example of what happened in Mendota is a really good example. Let's bring the regulators, in this case EPA, to our tables to talk to community members so that they hear from the same people who will be impacted by these facilities, the concerns, and how they can be prevented. I think that is just one example, but I'm sure that definitely building the table where more dialogue could happen is extremely important. But, we don't have to go to Sacramento. I think Sacramento can come to us.
Yeah, actually, yes, absolutely. And I actually want to take some facilitators initiative. Lupe, I want to see if you have any takes on this.
Well, I think Nayamin has said it all. I think at this point we need to make sure the community is totally involved and are empowered to hold those people who are responsible for our safety and our health and all of our things, for our communities, and that they hold them accountable. So I think we need to build the tables. We need to see who's at the table and do we have the right people at the table. And I don't mean the communities, I mean others, because I think we need to bring the others in here. And if not, then I think we need to think about building that new table and holding those legislators who are not being accountable to us, change them for others.
All right, now
Yeah.
go ahead.
Pedro, if I may, I think there is a book called Good to Great, and it has a great example. I think it mentioned about a bus, meaning a company, in this case, the government agencies and the tables, and it says that we need to have the right person at the driving seat, to put the right person there. We need to switch, the people on the bus, put them on the right seats, and kick off those that don't fit on any seat of the bus, and bring in people to fill out those seats. And I think what was mentioned, shared in Mendota, that I think that quick action with having someone with integrity in the EPA gave results. So I think we need to do that with government and government agencies. I think that works.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gustavo. I see another question coming up, and I'll read it aloud for everyone. Families and friends have passed away from cancer and other diseases because of these environmental injustices. How can we bring change more quickly in our communities? Oh, the golden question. So quick time check. We have about 5 minutes. So for anyone who would like to answer this, be brief, but let's go. So any volunteers?
I can start briefly. I think that, we, especially with policies, it takes so long for a policy to be introduced and then to be passed and then to be implemented. And our communities don't have time for that. Our communities need mitigation measures now. Our communities need emission reductions now. And I think that's what we all need to engage on. What can the government do to bring changes now and not, 10 or 20 years from now? So action is needed like yesterday.
Yeah, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, Cesar Aguirre with CCJN has been working the last couple of weeks, on the violation of abandoned oil wells. And he was telling me, he's my son, he was telling me, Dad, why I am doing the work of the government agencies. Is their duty to do it. So I think the existing regulations, government need to, enforce them. I think it takes sometimes, advocates to make them do the work. But I think we as advocates can pressure them to implement current regulations, on top of new regulations that are needed. That what is in place right now, it needs to be implemented, because it is not implemented. We always hear from a government, we have the strictest regulations in California than the world and all of that, but we don't implement them. Those are not worth if those are not implemented. So the implementation, on top of new laws, implementing what is in place already.
That's a very good point, because again, with all these pretty policies can be very pretty and fancy, but if we're not actually implementing them, then what is the point? I'll take another episode of Facilitator Initiative to do my take on a response, which the main question is, how do we make things more quickly? My first thought in my mind was, do we as advocates and just as community members too, we need to make sure we're not delaying anything either. Like as advocates, we have a privilege of being in certain spaces, and so I think there's an ethical responsibility to not negotiate against communities and not negotiate against a slower timeline. So that means being very firm and kind of standing what we know is right and demanding that solutions are implemented as soon as possible, because it is, I think, a certain, again, ethical responsibility we have as, you know, representatives, but also as neighbors of everyone as well too. I'm not seeing any other questions, so maybe what did you want to say?
I just wanted to add, I think, you know, we have seen the past, or at least I have seen the past. I've been here for quite a few years. And I've seen some changes, but those changes have been slow. And it seems that, however, now, today, I am getting to see the youth taking a different approach from what we did back then, 20 years, 30 years ago. And I'm seeing that the youth has a different, fast pace, quick one response. And I think that's what needs to happen. I think we need to also start paying attention to the youth who are taking a lot of this lead, and we need them to take the lead, and we need for them to really step forward and really take it on, because like Naomi said, I mean, time goes by real fast. When I look at, and I had mentioned earlier about the biomass here in Delano do Covanta, they told us of what the issues were going to be. To date, we don't have any response as to what are the issues with the health problems that caused, the asthmas and all these, or where are we at this point? We don't have no response. Trust us. Trust us. And I think the youth is saying, no, we're not going to trust you. We're not going to trust you.
Absolutely. And so I see that we're about at the 1 o'clock mark, and I see Sergio is also popping up as well too. So we might be timed out here, but maybe if I can just have some concluding comments of, feel free to reach out to any of our organizations as well too. We're all from the Valley. We want to make sure that justice does happen in the Valley as soon as possible and everywhere possible in the Valley as well too. So feel free to reach out to any of our organizations, and we'd love to see how we can support your communities and your issues as well too. And maybe I'll pass it over to Sergio. Thank you again.
Thanks, Pedro, and thank you all on the Environmental Justice Subcommittee. Tremendous presentation, such an informative presentation. You all are doing tremendous work in empowering our community residents to share their stories and to share their solutions of what they want to see in the San Joaquin Valley. What amazing opportunities there are for our appointed and elected officials and state agencies to partner with our community partners to create meaningful environmental justice policy and system changes that will help the solution, but also ultimately save lives. So we're really grateful for all the work that you all have been doing, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. Well, folks, that concludes our San Joaquin Valley Health Fund 7th Annual Equity on the Mall. What an eventful 2 days it has been. We are so proud to share the beautiful and critical work of our communities and our community partners in the San Joaquin Valley as they build up the power of Valley residents. They lift up their voices and speak truth to power. It has been an honor to be the MC for the last 2 days with you all, and an honor to be working in partnership with the community part that you all heard today, and many, many more who weren't showcased today on this platform, but are with us in spirit and are with us in this work that we also want to be thanking as well. On behalf of the Sierra Health Foundation and the Center at Sierra Health Foundation, I would like to thank all the community members of the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund, all of the members of the IHEAL policy subcommittees and the policy committee in general, our consultants at Macero Incorporated, the back-end support for modern learners, all of our interpreters, the staff at the Center at Sierra Health Foundation, all the appointed and elected leaders who joined us over the last 2 days, the over 40 philanthropic partners that support the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund and Equity on the Mall, and most importantly, you, our community partners and residents in the San Joaquin Valley. You make this work possible. You make this work happen. You make the day-to-day happen, and you are changing and saving lives in the San Joaquin Valley with your important work. Such an incredible, body of work and beautiful people here in the Valley, and you all deserve the best. And we hope to support you all and continue to do the work that brings the best to the San Joaquin Valley. Please stay tuned for more to come from our community partners as we will extend the conversations that were started here the last 2 days in equity on the mall and bring them down to regional level as we kick off our regional town hall meeting series. Through September, we will be hosting 3 regional town hall meetings that are going to be geared to engage our community partners, residents, and community leaders to continue conversations started here and focus them on the work happening through the iHeal platform at a local level to bring about local changes and make sure that we're seeing implementation, as we'll talk about today, happen with resources that are coming down from the state as well. So we hope that you can join us for those, and we will be getting information out to those series as well coming soon. We invite you to stay in touch as well. Head over to the Center at Sierra Health Foundation website at www.shfcenter.org. Click on the program tab and learn about the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund, and where you can sign up for our weekly e-blast newsletters. You can sign up for the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund monthly partnership newsletters and connect with us on all of our social media platforms. Once again, on behalf of all of our community partners, the Center at Sierra Health Foundation, the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund, I say thank you and stay safe, stay healthy, and keep advocating for all that we deserve here in the Valley. It's been a beautiful 2 days. I thank you very much, and we will see you soon